So my name is Pal Vik and I come from the University of Salford. Isabel de Schrijver from DG Regio was supposed to be here to, well, wasn't able to make it in the end to go to present here. So I've been sent I've been sent her slides and some of her notes. I'm going to just briefly go through that presentation, and then I'll move on to the next one.
Cool.
All right, is that better? Right. So, I'm here to talk about the European Code of Good Conduct for Microcredit Provision. And here's just a slide talking a bit about the process for how it was developed. From the Commission point of view, it's important to stress that the intention of the code was not to dictate sort of one way to do microfinance, but really rather to support a diverse set of approaches and priorities within a framework of recognized good practice principles. There were some preparatory workshops with experts, and we also analyzed some existing frameworks. And the workshop organized in collaboration with DG Enterprise. The code was launched in 2011, on October 2011. And following that launch, there was a pilot process in which 13 microfinance institutions participated and tried and looked at how these practices could be implemented in their organizations, and they came up with some suggestions for how it could, for some amendments. So a second version was launched this summer. Right. So yeah. So it's the pilot phase and the second version. So the next step for microcredit organizations willing to officially implement the code is to complete a sign-up form and send it to DG Regio. When you sign up to the code, you're given 18 months to implement the clauses, and I'll talk a bit more about that in my presentation. So the methodology for the external evaluation of compliance is due to be launched in October or next month this year. And in addition to the code, there's a tool called Jasmine Online, which is developed to support providers through this process. And I'll talk a bit more about the detail of the code when I get to my own presentation. The Commission is going to so the external validation of the code of whether an organization is going to be done. It's going to be done externally by under contract with the Commission. Right, so I just wanted to just briefly talk about there's two. So the code is mainly intended for non-bank microcredit providers. So non-bank microcredit providers can sign up through the process, go through a self-assessment process, and implement the code in terms of 18 months. After that point, you'll be assessed whether you comply with the code or not. And for banks, there is going to be an endorsement template where they essentially officially recognize the value of the code. They recommend that providers sign up to it, and they don't implement the code themselves, but they commit to provide support for microfinance partners who might want to implement the code. Right. So the purpose of of the monitoring and of the external validation of the process is really it's seen as a logical extension of having developed the code. It's a recognition that an organization is complying with a certain sets of certain standards, and it's also lends visibility and credibility to the organization. Right. So so that was that presentation. Okay. Right. So. Right. At least I'm a bit more familiar with this with these slides. So thank you for the invitation to speak at this workshop. I'm going to be talking a bit about the code and explaining what it is, and then drawing out, what are the implications for microfinance providers, especially in Hungary, and also looking at its implementation. So I'll talk a bit about what the code is and why and how it was developed. I'll talk a bit about the benefits of the potential benefits of signing up. I'm talking about how you, as a microfinance institution, can comply with the code and how that's going to be the process for how that's going to be verified. And I'm going to address the issue, which I understand is a bit of a concern, is whether it contradicts existing Hungarian regulation. So for those of you who are not familiar with the code, it's essentially a document that sets out recognized good practice in microcredit provision. It's essentially a tool for stakeholders and managers and board members to improve the operation of their organizations. And it sets a common sort of standard across for microcredit provision across the EU. And as I said, it's primarily for non-bank providers. It has 5 chapters. There is to date still no social impact chapter. I'm not really sure when that's going to be implemented. That depends a bit on the Commission. But these chapters, so they cover customer and investor relations. So what sort of rights should customers have? What sort of obligations do you have in terms of your customers? Covers business, covers governance, so business planning, responsibilities and roles of the board, sort of external audits. Covers a bit about risk management, so how do we identify risk and what sort of procedures in terms of internal controls and internal audits should we have? Reporting standards, so what should we all, so setting some kind of common standard for what we report and how what data we disclose to the public. And then also management information systems, so how do you safeguard the security, how do you in terms of sort of functional completeness. So the University of Salford was selected to draft the code. And it was led by Professor Carl Dason, my colleague, and myself. And there was an extensive consultation with stakeholders. So we had stakeholder workshops, we met with trade bodies, and we also got input from various providers by sending out draft comments. Right. So what are the potential? What's in it for microfinance institutions? Well, I guess as an individual provider, it's you can become more efficient and effective by adopting the good practice identified in the code. I also think an important aspect of it is that it allows you to benchmark yourself against other providers. So there are a set of indicators that providers are recommended to disclose. As a sector, I also think it has the potential to enhance the reputation of the sector vis-à-vis funders and investors, or sort of potentially regulators, because it's sort of an official recognition that the provider operates according to best practice. And is also going to be possibly be a precondition for accessing European funding for microfinance. At least the Parliament is looking at that. Right, so, okay, so if you're interested in signing up, what does it actually mean to comply with the code, right? Okay, so the code contains a set of clauses, and those clauses are weighted according to importance. There are some that are medium, high, and priority. To comply with the code, you have to comply with at least 80% of all applicable clauses and all of the priority clauses. So there are about 20 priority clauses identified in the document. Just to really explain what I mean by applicable clauses. So there are some clauses in the document that are not going to be relevant to you, and there might be sort of 3 reasons for that, I guess. There might be, for one thing, you might be a small provider, and some clauses only apply to larger providers. It might contradict your national legal framework, and I'll discuss that more later on, or it might not be material to you as an organization. So if there is a clause, I don't know, on safeguarding the interests of individual investors, and you don't have any individual investors, then obviously that is not an applicable clause because it doesn't really apply to you. Right, actually I'll just drop that now. So that's probably not very easy to see this slide. So I'll just briefly talk through it. So from when you decide that you're going to sign up to the process of getting, well, hopefully getting recognized as complying with the code, there are 3 sort of phases. There's like the pre-evaluation phase, and then there's the evaluation phase, and then after that there's the sort of post-award award phase. And providers wanting to sign up can address their initial inquiries to DG Regio, and they can decide to sign up to the code, at which point they give an 18 months to comply with the document. And the way having done that, you complete and submit what's called a self-assessment tool, which is a tool to really help you assess your level of compliance. And you request that the evaluation starts. In the evaluation, one of the first things the evaluator is going to have to do is look at the justification for non-applicable clauses, because you're going to say, oh, there are these 30 clauses that don't apply to me as an organization. So they're going to have to look and see, okay, are these relevant? Are these actually, should they really be complying? Are these applicable? You're going to have to look at documentation and then review compliance with the clause. After that, they're going to submit a recommendation or a report outlining a recommendation to an independent steering group. So the evaluators are not going to make a final decision on whether you comply or not. They're going to make a recommendation. And this independent steering group is then going to make a decision on the award. They're also going to be providing some sort of post-award decision support and advice. So, there are these particular areas of concern in terms of your organization in relation to the code, for example. Where a provider fails to meet the necessary standard, they will be given sort of specific guidance around how to address it and given time to address it, and then the amendments they've done can then be submitted to the steering group for them to review. So you wouldn't have to go through the whole process again. Right. So, as I understand it, there's a concern that the code doesn't really fit with Hungarian legal definition of foundations, and particularly around the governance chapter, where there's a requirement for organizations to have an independent board. And there are really 2 aspects of this. One is that this body has to be independent from management and staff, so management staff and customers, so that the majority of the people on that body are not sort of a combination of these 3 groups. and their role is to oversee management and development organizations. So their role is to see, you know, is there mission drift? Is the management taking the organization along the lines they were supposed to? Are they checking properly for risking, etc.? So that's the essence of that. Just to make some very general comments about the code and legal frameworks. So the code is voluntary. It's not intended to replace existing regulation, and it isn't sort of regulation, because I mean part of the idea about the code was also developed in recognition that actually, you know, across the EU there's so many different frameworks, there's so many different you know, there's so many differences. So actually EU-wide regulation is probably not the best way to actually raise standards of the sector. So national regulation will always supersede the code. You know, we cannot ask you to implement things that go against your own laws. So I think it's also important to stress that there's a recognition that the code is not going to be implemented in an identical fashion across the whole EU. So, you know, for an MFI operating in a rural setting in Hungary is going to be different from an MFI operating in the city of London, for example. You know, there just wouldn't make sense for them to both implement it same. So there is explicit guidance for the evaluators in the evaluated methodology that they have to be sensitive to the national context and also know the national context. I think that's going to be one of the key things, that the evaluators can draw on a network of sort of national experts, because obviously what is good practice in Romanian countryside is not necessarily good practice in the city of London. And also national regulation differ, and different types of institutions will have different practice, maybe especially sort of from credit unions or mutual organizations. So in terms of this concern around the, so in terms of how Hungarian MFIs can get around this issue of governance and a board, I think you can either comply with with the relevant clauses by either you have a mechanism for oversight that is equivalent to having a board, so you have something that is independent, responsible and empowered to provide sort of a sufficient level of oversight, or you can demonstrate that such a mechanism would contradict Hungarian regulation and therefore, you know, it couldn't apply. So thank you very much.